that up, Adi 9:18. Thus the branches of the Chaitanya tree formed a cluster or society with great branches covering all over the universe. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, our International Society for Krishna Consciousness is one of the branches of the Chaitanya tree. So we have a very, very important branch of the Chaitanya tree here manifested as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. One final quote from the Lilamrita says, as Mr. Rubin, the subway conductor who had met Prabhupada on a Manhattan Park bench in 1965, had noted, he seemed to know that he would have temples filled up with devotees. There are temples and books, he said. They are existing. They are there, but time is separating us from them. So now, only time separates us from the fulfillment of this great destiny of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness over the next 50 years. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada coming and founding this great Hare Krishna movement, and now, today, Anuttama Prabhu and I are going to be talking about the next 50 years. What are some of the challenges and opportunities we're going to be facing over the next 50 years at ISKCON 100? We've divided this into a few different positions. You know, we probably have way too much material here, and each one of these should have a class in itself. So we're basically going to talk about, Anuttama will talk about Srila Prabhupada's position in 150 years. I'm going to talk about family, children, and social structure, then economics. You see, I gave Anuttama all the hard ones. I'm going to talk about education. Anuttama will then talk about outreach, and I'll say a few words about leadership and management structure. Because we have a lot of material to cover in a short amount of time, we'll ask you to note your questions. We'll save them to the end. Otherwise, we could get easily off into so many areas and probably not finish the presentation. So, without further ado, Anuttama Prabhu.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So first I want to thank the Chicago Temple and its members and leaders for very much focusing on the 50th anniversary. There's banners everywhere, and the new posters have just been put up, and it's very good to help inspire the devotees and help people. I noticed even I was chanting japa outside, and you read the sign, how many temples, how much prasadam has been distributed, etc. So it's very nice. Looking back briefly at the first 50 years, we see there's been many, many changes in our first 50 years. So we're going to be looking at what are some of the opportunities and challenges coming up. And if we look back just briefly, we can see in the earliest days, being a devotee meant being a brahmachari or a brahmacharini in the temple. That was the definition of being a devotee. The word congregation, I think, surfaced around 1980-something, when you first started hearing it mentioned in Bhagavatam classes. Originally, we were a community of all young Western converts, very enthusiastic, not particularly mature in terms of everything that means. We didn't have a congregation. Most temples in the very beginning were homes or rentals or sometimes converted churches. We still have a lot of that too, but that's all we were. In the earliest years, we were outwardly persecuted in Soviet countries in different parts of the world. There was very little formal training. We had no presence in academia to speak of outside of Prabhupada's books and sales of Prabhupada's books to scholars. And we only had one guru and one source of authority. That was it. It was a different situation today. It's all changed. There's been many, many successes, lots of achievements, but also we know there's been some problems. We even have some splits. We've only been around 50 years. We already have some splits. So there's some real challenges. So I wanted to touch on my three topics in terms of the kind of general questions. Will ISKCON continue to exist the next 50 years? You can put in parentheses, because I think that's going to happen no matter what. But as a dynamic organization and community, that's a question we need to ask ourselves. How's that going to happen? Second, will ISKCON continue to grow? So I'm going to focus on one of the challenges connected to that. And will ISKCON make a difference? We want to exist, we want to grow, but are we going to make a difference? So we're going to look at those three questions. So the first one, will ISKCON continue to exist as a dynamic organization? And I would highlight Lots could be said on each of these points that Tomahara and I are going to discuss, but I would highlight this one point and say emphatically, yes, if we keep His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, in the center. If 50 years from now Prabhupada is still in the center of ISKCON, ISKCON will still have a center, and many centers, and many more centers. We'll have one center with many centers, not many centers with no center. We have to be very careful about that. And we know Prabhupada himself instructed us. He said, ISKCON can't be stopped from the outside, only from the inside. He predicted that. He made that statement. So what does that mean to stay together, be strong? Well, we have to have a shared vision. We have to have a shared system of decision-making. As Prabhupada emphasized so many times, we have to have cooperation. And one of the challenges we see, as an example of how to maintain that, Prabhupada established the GBC, established temple presidents. That was his functioning line of authority when he was physically with us. And in the organization he created, and many places in his letters in particularly, he stressed the GBC, the governing body, commission, and local leaders, temple presidents, working cooperatively with them. But we also see in his books, he didn't talk that much about GBC. What was the authority that he talked about mostly in his books? Spiritual master and the disciple. So one person maybe reads the letters and looks at the way Prabhupada managed, they might get a certain sense of authority. Someone just reads the books, what's a GBC? What's a temple president? I need a guru, full stop. So there are some potential problems there. Which authority? How do authorities interact cooperatively? And we've seen in the last few years responding to that, with the emphasis being, again, we need to keep Srila Prabhupada in the center. And if we respect his singular position as our founder Charya, and as... Fix this. It's fine. He's going to fix the mic. Okay, Hare Krishna. Okay. If we respect his singular position as the founder Charya and the preeminent Siksha Guru, then that will allow us to keep him in the center and balance different lines of authority, different interpretations of how to serve him best, different emphasis if we keep him in the center. And at the same time, we can't get too carried away, because we've seen there are splinter groups who want to go so far as to say, like our Christian friends, well, Prabhupada's God. That happened in the early years. There was a group of disciples. So no, Prabhupada's God. He just hasn't told everybody that. Caused a lot of problems. And Prabhupada was physically here, and he fixed that problem. He more or less banned those people for a period of time until they came around. And we have today the idea, the Ritvik idea, that Prabhupada is the only one who can initiate disciples. So these are some examples of how, if we go too far, what does it mean to keep Prabhupada in the center? So the challenge is oftentimes that we want to put another center. Prabhupada's not the center, or Prabhupada's vision, or Prabhupada's mission is not the center. My temple is the center. My temple's the center. Whatever is important for my temple, that's the most important thing. Or my region, or my country, that's the most important thing. As long as Transylvania makes progress, that's what counts. Other things don't count. Or my guru is the center. Your guru, okay, nice, respectful to him, but my guru is the center. All of this leads to splits, weakens our society, and we've seen so many examples how we're stronger together. When Russia was attacked, recently trying to advocate the Bhagavad Gita should be banned, international influences made all the difference. We're stronger together. So what's the solution? Keep Prabhupada in the center, his instructions, his vision, his books, his worship. We know individually and communally also how important it is for us to keep Prabhupada, our association with Prabhupada, because he is the Shaktivesh avatar, he is our founder Charya, he is our primary Siksha Guru, preeminent Siksha Guru. So the GBC's taken a lot of steps to try to ensure Prabhupada's position. The Lines of Authority paper, the Disciple Course, we have Prabhupada in Vyasa-san, we have Prabhupada on the altar. It's recommended that every devotee, whether you're second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation, every devotee should chant Prabhupada's pranams, etc. If we continue to do these practices, meditating on Prabhupada's position, emphasizing his books, we'll stay together as a unified movement, and we will continue to exist as a strong force for the next 50 years and beyond.
Is this working now? Okay. Hare Krishna, thank you. I'm going to really switch gears here. I don't know if we put these topics so much in logical sequence or not, but this is moving to a whole nother area. I'm going to talk about family life, children, and sort of the sociological growth and structure of ISKCON, and what it might be like, what are some of our current challenges, and what the future might be. I was thinking, I recently heard a class, a Bhagavatam class, from a very respected speaker, a senior devotee who I think gives great classes, and he mentioned he was just talking, I guess maybe he was answering a question or something, and he made a distinction. He said the distinction between, on one hand, caring for the family, and on the other hand, devotional service. Now, I assume that was just sort of a gaffe. If I questioned him, I don't think he would say taking care of your family is not devotional service, but this does reflect a continuing ambivalence or ambiguity that we've had within our movement on exactly what is the position of household life and the Grihastha ashram. And in fact, I think we have different statements from Scripture that sometimes can be confusing to devotees. In the Bhagavatam 7.5.5, we have the description of Griham Andakupam, the blind well of household life. On the other hand, Srila Prabhupada makes some clear distinctions. In 6.5.42, Prabhupada says, in the purport, sometimes householders are accused of being Grihamatis, for Grihamatis are satisfied with family life without spiritual advancement. Grihastas, however, are different, because although Grihastas live in householder life with their wives and children, they are eager for spiritual advancement. So we have this clear distinction, and I would say there's a general acceptance within our society now of the necessity and a very important role and the value of household life. I think it's still quite unclear, and there's many, many differences of opinion about the role of household life, its importance, its impact, its function. You talk to 10 different people and you get 10 different answers on this probably. So I think this has presented a certain amount of challenges that we're going to need to overcome in the next 50 years. One is we have, I think, a lack of clarity on how our Vaishnava culture and the prevailing larger culture intersect, and how do we interact with the two. For instance, an example, how do families observe holidays? How do we observe Vaishnava holidays? I don't think we have a clear cultural sense of that. Now, if you speak to families from an Indian background, often they had some very clear things. Our family did this at Diwali or Holi, right, or like that. You know, some idea, but especially for those of us from the West, that's not part of our culture. We haven't had generations of history to really sort of observe different things in different ways. What do we do for Janmashtami? Well, we all know what we do for Janmashtami. We come to the temple and we have a wonderful celebration worshiping Krishna. But what does the family do? What's the sort of what is the family unit? What is their interaction, or how do they observe Janmashtami? Well, probably if we just get everybody in the car and go to the temple, that's probably okay. Maybe that's all right. But I'm giving these examples of things we're not very clear on, that we've really established these things culturally. And how do we integrate with predominant national culture? I think because we have not developed culture very well, many of us tend to still accept certain remnants of our previous culture. Probably most, I would say many families, particularly Western families, probably get together and do something at Christmas. I mean, my family does. Is it Maya? I don't know. I mean, we, usually, we may give some gifts and have a nice prasadam, et cetera, et cetera. It's just because it's a remnant of our past culture, and we haven't really instituted those systems, beliefs, systems, norms, rituals. I say ritual in a good sense, in the sociological sense. Not that what we do in Krishna consciousness is ritual, but still, we need a certain amount of those things to sort of hold ourselves together and keep our lives and our families and everything's working in a good way. I think we have a particular problem with our children and adolescents, and that problem is that the roles and the norms are not clear, and they're very much differing depending upon parts of the world, parts of the country, family to family. For example, what is our exact policy, or our, not policies, maybe too strong of a word, but what are our attitudes about relationships with the opposite sex, with teenagers? Dating. Do we allow dating? Do we not allow dating? Do we try to stay with arranged marriages? Is that no longer feasible? It's very difficult to do. What is acceptable contact? How is that regulated? those things I think aren't worked out real well yet. Participation in temple programs, sadhana, how much should be required? How much do we force that, or how much do we encourage that? And also participation in non-devotee activities with our children, teenagers. Now I think it's pretty well accepted that they'll, are probably going to engage in sports and things like this because young people need to do these things. I remember, for an example, in one of our first Gurukula conferences we had nationally, I think it was in the 80s, we held it at Bhaktivedanta Village. I was president there at our Gurukula in California, and we were, of course, on the left coast, and then we had the, we had the right coast, we had the eastern temples, and we were always considered a little bit on the liberal side out west in California. And one of the headmasters of one of the schools from the east posed a problem. He says, well, we've got this real problem with our kids. They all want to ride, they want to all have bicycles. And, we're kind of scratching our heads. And what was the problem exactly with, riding in other words, at that time, riding a bicycle was considered Maya. It seems a lot of you are smiling. You would think, what's the problem? Children ride bicycles, right? So, but these are the kind of things that we have been evolving towards and working through these kinds of social issues. Why do we have these problems? I think they come from lack of clear definition and practice. We often know the philosophy, but how do we practically apply it case by case isn't always clear and worked out. And we are a new movement. We're celebrating 50 years, but that's not a very long time, is it, Anuttama, for religious movements?
Not at our age.
No, I mean, it's a very short time. It's, we're still the first generation. Those of us who met Prabhupada and joined the movement are still here amongst you, for better or worse. But anyway, so we're very new, and we don't have a lot of experience in establishing culture. Remember that Srila Prabhupada said towards his later days, talking about Varnashram, and he said, half my work is done through establishing book distribution, and the other half is yet to come. And when Prabhupada talked about Varnashram, I take that in a wider sense of establishing culture, establishing the social and cultural aspects of a working society. We got the books out, we're still getting the books out, that'll never stop. The preaching goes on, but at the same time, how do we develop, after we make all these devotees, how do we develop that culture and the social institutions and relationships that are going to support devotees? And Prabhupada said that he was unable to complete that. So that's left for us to complete. And we've had 40 years now, and I don't think we've made a whole lot of progress, and hopefully in the next 50 years, we'll make more progress in those areas. We also have a very small number of devotees, relatively speaking, within the much larger culture. I don't think you can really ignore the impact of the larger host culture, of which we are a small subculture within. And that affects our families and our children very much, as we all know. And we have not really developed a lot of institutions. We have very few schools. I'm talking about education in a few minutes. We have about 5 schools in America, 2 or 3 of them of any size at all. And other social institutions, social services, these things really aren't there in our society. I was going to get the idea of the 4 generations, but I don't think I'm going to have time for that. I'll give the purport on that. As we go generation after generation, there's a sociological sort of concept that we tend to erode from the original issues, instructions, context, and intentions of the founder. And each generation, those tend to erode. I'm not as Rompa, so I may want to speak about this later. He's a little more familiar with this. But I'll give you an example. There was something went on in one of our conferences with GBC, and someone was talking about kirtan standards and mentioned this practice of chanting one syllable at a time, or one, like Hare, Hare, Krishna, Krishna, and I responded. But Narayan Swami wrote back, and he said, I was there in Los Angeles when Srila Prabhupada stopped the kirtan when they were doing that, and he explained, we don't do this, we chant the whole mantra, all 16 words, repeat in response. Now, Bhadri Narayan Maharaj, being there, he understood the issue, chanting Hare Krishna, he understood the instruction clearly from Srila Prabhupada. He also could tell us the context of when it happened, how it happened, and he understood the intention. Now, in future generations, you'll think of it, someone may hear that story, but we're not quite sure, well, what did Prabhupada really intend? Did he mean only in the temple room? Did he mean sometimes? Did he mean, these things become less clear. The context, well, where was it? Well, that was in the temple room. Maybe outside we can do it differently. In other words, we start losing the context, and finally, even there's danger of losing the instruction itself and even the whole issue. So that's the idea. There's a natural tendency to sort of, I don't want to say deviate, I guess deviate's all right, from the original intention of Srila Prabhupada and the founder Acharya. So that's kind of what we're balancing. We have to balance what is a natural evolution of developing our society in terms of the social and cultural norms, and as we establish that and expand that in a very natural way, but that we don't deviate from the instructions and intentions of the founder Acharya. So what's needed? I think, first of all, maturing attitudes, and I think this will come about through future generations. I think there's going to be more and more acceptance. Grihastas are here to stay. Most devotees will become householders. Probably 95%, devotees will be in this ashram. I've even seen that the attitudes amongst the second and third generation, our younger devotees, is quite different. They're very relaxed, very accepting about that. We often see that even with our Indian communities. Sometimes they don't have a big issue about family life. It's just natural. It's there. It's part of what you do. The issue is, how do you bring Krishna consciousness into it? That's usually the issue. How do you integrate your Krishna conscious practice into your existing family life? I think that we'll develop more social service systems, more support networks. Those will need to happen. Support for work, for jobs, training, how to be productive. Now we see old devotees, 60 years old or whatever, and then they need to work, and they go out and they're selling hats or something. I mean, I'm not criticizing them. They weren't trained. They don't have much else they can do. But is that what we want? You're going to get into economics. I won't go there. But in other words, we need to accept that there's going to need to be training for people to work as productive members of our society. And also, another thing that's going to develop is by year 100, we'll be up to about our 5th or 6th generation, which means that we have a tremendous support system already happening. When you have intergenerational transmission of culture, you have great strength. And every generation that we're continuing strongly is going to become more strong, because even children now, like say our 3rd generation, like my grandchildren, there's no question they're they're devotees. That's what they are. It's their identity. And they have, and my grandchildren, we live in the same community. We actually live in 3 houses next to each other. And so there's us, my wife and I, and our children, 2 sets of children, and grandchildren. And those grandchildren are getting taught in Krishna consciousness by their parents, but also by us, by their grandparents, who spend a lot of time with them. And that just forms more and more stronger networks of support. So I can't imagine they'll decide someday, I won't be a devotee. Of course, the free will of the living entity is always there, and that could happen. But they've got a very, very strong support system to keep them in Krishna consciousness. Okay, so that's naturally going to happen, a natural integration of family life in this kind of communities. And again, it's a matter of establishing culture. We have to solidify our culture norms, our roles, our rituals, our expectations, and at the same time, careful to preserve Srila Prabhupada's instructions and intent. Okay, back to you.
I'll just mention that these are kind of big topics, and we both realize that we're kind of maybe more than we normally would want to kind of rattle off a little bit of analysis and list of things. But it's a big topic, so we want to try to touch on as much of it as we can. So hopefully you're finding some relevance. There's a lot of feedback on this one, Prabhu.
You want to take
Hare
this?
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Okay.
Maybe
So, next question that I had posed, will we continue to grow? And again, that can be looked at from a million different ways, and I wanted to look at one that I personally think is a big challenge, and many devotees are talking about this and thinking about it, which is the economic basis. In the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada explains that every endeavor requires land, capital, organization, and people to be successful. It says those 4 things. And we see clearly Prabhupada definitely wanted land, wanted temples. He emphasized that, a place for people to come, to chant, do service together. He fought for Juhu when there was a struggle over the land. He fought strongly. You know, in Hawaii, when land was misappropriated, he fought to make sure we could keep it. So it's clear that was an emphasis, and the GBC is also stressing that more and more now, making sure our legal structure is in place to protect the properties, to protect the land. We see clearly Prabhupada wanted to take care of and develop people. He was very active in bringing devotees into Krishna consciousness, very concerned about their care. And in the last few years, the GBC and our other leaders have emphasized that more and more, devotee care as a priority. We know that Prabhupada wanted organization. You know, looking at those four things, he emphasized organization. The wonderful quote with Giriraj Maharaj was called by Prabhupada in the middle of the night. Prabhupada said, will it continue? And he asked Giriraj Maharaj, will it continue? And then Prabhupada answered his own question. He said, with intelligence and organization. So that's something directly from the mouth of our founder, Acharya. And again, the GBC and our leadership, they're emphasizing this more now, developing the organization, developing training, etc. The last thing is capital, economic basis. What's our plan for that? We're not so clear on that one. But our founder Acharya said it's one of the four things that's necessary. And it's a challenge. I think it's very important over the next 50 years. I would say it's important to be figured out over the next 10 or 15. It's going to require some cultural change. But if we look back, we can see primarily our movement is focused on Brahminical activity. Prabhupada said we're Brahmanas, so our focus is not making money. That's not what we stress in many ways. But still, ISKCON needs resources. And in the early years, those of us that were members in the early years, half of our, I'm going to say half, but a big emphasis was to provide that economic base for the society. And so we had the devotees, brahmacharis, brahmachaриnis living in temples. Emphasis was preaching and doing book sales, but also that was where the money came from. And it was glorious. A lot of books were distributed, but that pressure of getting money caused a lot of problems. And we're fortunate these days with the leadership of ISKCON Prabhu and other devotees who have refocused our attention that the goal of book distribution is first and foremost, make a good impression. And if we do that, the books will naturally flow out. In the early years, because there was no economic foundation, a lot of pressure was there. Make sure you get enough money for the books. And that kind of came through and it limited our preaching. So we did that for some time, and then some idea came in about, well, maybe we should do some businesses. Sankirtan for many of us slowly became do businesses and use the money to buy books. So that was seen as not perhaps the best long-term model. There are very few countries in the world where temples get money from the government. It's not a lot, but there are a few. Sociologists study that, sociologists, religions say actually it weakens the organization. When you're dependent upon the government to get money, you don't have to preach, you don't have to teach, there's no competition between different groups, no healthy competition. So that's not a good model either. So what's our plan? Well, today we know we have more congregational members than ever before. I talked about that in my first section. Those members have more money than ever before. It'd be interesting if there was a study, photographs of parking lots in the Hare Krishna movement, 1966, 1970, 1970, every 5 years. That would have been a very interesting study. A lot more BMWs and things like that in our parking lots today. And those people do give to support our organization, inspired largely by Hindu tradition and our roots in the Hindu tradition. They're largely inspired to do two things, to build temples or support the deities, or to give to sadhus. That's the culture. You talked about culture change. That's basically the culture that we kind of bring. But that's not our Vaishnava culture in its entirety. It's not Prabhupada's culture in its entirety. Because Prabhupada said many places in his books, you should give money to support what? The movement and the preaching. So, of course, giving money to temples and to sadhus and to worship the deities is a part of that, but it's not the whole picture. So I would suggest that over the next 10 years, by 50, if we haven't figured this out, we're going to have some serious problems. Our congregation, which largely means our grahastas, need to understand that one of their primary duties is to give charity, and not just for land and the three aspects, not just to build temples, not just to have money in the bank, but to build organization and to take care of people. Not just build temples, but fill the temples, make sure they're active temples. Otherwise, we haven't really understood Prabhupada's vision. We are becoming a large organization, and at the top, we are, I would go so far as to say, ridiculously thin. I'd like to thank the Chicago Temple for providing the International Minister of Communications the money to pay for the hotel last night, because otherwise, if you didn't have room in the temple, I would have been on the street, because I don't have a car to sleep in, and I don't have money to pay for the motel. So, you know, that's my karma, but in the other sense, it's like, well, what kind of structure is that? You know, Tomahara Prabhu is a member of the GBC. He overlooks, I don't know, 10, 15 temples and so many different committees. And at the end of the meeting last night at 7 o'clock, he said, I've got to go home and grade papers, because he's maintained his role as a professor, which is wonderful that he can do that. And of course, he's educating and influencing so many young minds. But in addition to doing that out of his benevolence, he also needs the money, because the society doesn't provide for his plane ticket to come to Chicago, etc. So we are getting bigger, but we have some needs. We need legal offices. Legal offices require money. We need better and expanded child protection. We know that. One of the big issues with that is how do we finance that? We need education, but also educational systems. Most organizations, spiritual, religious organizations our size, there's a local need to educate kids. You contact the central office and you get lots of material, lots of books, lots of promotional things, lots of structures, lesson plans, etc. And ours is a bit of a hit and miss on that. Communications work. Most organizations our size, I'm in Washington, D.C., I mean, there's a lot of folks down there trying to have some influence on the government's policy on religious freedom, the government's policy on healthy diet, the government's policy on what should be taught about religion in schools. Should it be taught? Shouldn't it be taught? Etc. A lot of folks down there. We don't have a lot of folks down there. We got 1.25. Planning and development. We want to grow our temples. What's the system? Where's the resources? Where's the structure? Etc. So we're big, we're getting bigger, and we're kind of like the pot, the plant in the pot that the roots are outgrowing the pot. Pot's too small, and you don't grow. At a certain point in time, the plant kills itself by its own growth, isn't it? You know, we've all seen that. The roots are growing out the side of the pot. They can't go anywhere. The plant dies. So what is that pot? Well, if we think its money is to build temples and to worship the deities, and maybe publish some books, if we're seeing that, but we're not seeing that we have to also take care of our people, and we also have to build the organization, the pot's too small. And we see that in the first 50 years, as Tomahara mentioned a bit of his discussion, the stress was economically, as far as individuals depend upon ISKCON, they'll take care of you. And sadly, ISKCON can't do all that. The institution can't provide for all the needs of the people that we need to grow. We don't have facilities to provide properly for devotees that have kids, and their kids want to go to college, and eventually they're going to retire. It's not the duty of the temple to do that. It's the duty of the congregation. And if we don't do that, we limit our ability to attract good people. We're still attracting very good people, but there's some we can't attract because we can't provide for the basic needs, and we lose some of those people. So we need to think about that in terms of the economic needs of our devotees. Brahmacharis, brahmacharis can always live very simply. That's the blessing. That's the strength that they bring to the society. But the grahastas have more, and as you read in that great quote, that's not grihamedi life to have a few needs. That's grahasta ashram. So the challenge is, can we educate and inspire our congregation now over the next 10 years, the next 50 years, to contribute their resources and to be inspired doing it, and to know that it's not only their duty, it's their pleasure, it's their honor, it's their joy to support the people that are going to be the inner core of our Krishna conscious movement, and to build the organization. Those instructions are there in Prabhupada's books. We need to teach that, and we need to implement it. Without it, our growth's going to be limited. Your turn.
Thank you. Anuttama Prabhu mentioned one of those types of things that we're going to need support for is education. I want to talk about that for a little bit. I'm not going to talk so much about outreach or external education. I think Anuttama will speak a little bit more about that, but more about internal education, about what do we need to do what are our challenges, and what would we like to accomplish over the next 50 years. Prabhupada said, Gurukula is our most important project. If the children are given a Krishna conscious education from early childhood, then there's great hope for future in the world. So obviously that was very, very important, our schools, but even in a broader sense, Srila Prabhupada saw this Krishna consciousness movement as an educational institution. Everything we do is education. In the Quest for Enlightenment, Prabhupada said, in this Krishna conscious movement, we are giving people a chance to understand the problems of life and how to solve them. It is not a sectarian movement or a so-called religious movement. It is an educational and cultural movement. So education was at the forefront of everything that Srila Prabhupada did. Writing his books, translating his books, writing his purports, this was all education. Education in Krishna consciousness, spiritual education. So that's what we're really talking about. How do we provide spiritual education to our children, to our new people, and to leaders, to everybody who needs more education, both spiritually and in specific skills which will enhance our service. We see a lot of challenges, especially in our primary and secondary education. There's actually, last I saw, there's perhaps 5 schools in North America. 2 of them are very small. There's really the only really ones of any size at all are in Dallas and in Alachua. And it's an ongoing challenge. I've been in conversations with, just not a lot, but off and on over the years with devotees in Chicago who've always been interested in having some school here. Why isn't there a school for children in Chicago? There aren't enough children. There's not enough mass of people. There's not enough support. It's very difficult to establish and develop and create and maintain a school unless you have a sufficient number of people, and that's part of our problem. Our devotees tend to be very dispersed, and and only a few children in different areas. There's other problems as well, but that's kind of the beginning of it. So usually our schools are poorly funded. We don't have adequate resources. It's difficult for many devotee families to pay tuition. They don't have a lot of money. And thus it's hard to find qualified teachers at low pay. It's not hard to find teachers, by the way. We have a lot of teachers, actually, within our movement. It's hard to find teachers who will work for minimal salaries, when they have probably their own families to take care of, etc. We've also experienced in the past problems with our ashram schools. Srila Prabhupada mentions Gurukula, and Prabhupada usually envisioned an ashram-based school when he talked about Gurukula. The only ones left that we have anymore, I think, are a couple or a few in India, and we've had great difficulties with them. We've had so many difficulties with ashram schools that I think that you'd find a great reluctance for a lot of support for ashram schools. So that's another difficulty we've had, is we've had some bad history. Also, I would say there's a seeming, and I don't want to say this in criticism of anyone or any group, but it appears as though there's a lack of institutional commitment towards education. We don't see the institution putting a lot of time, a lot of talk, a lot of money into education. And it seems like whatever educational projects exist, because a few dedicated people somehow scrape and scrounge and get it together and make it happen. Of course, that's the way it is with many projects. It takes dedicated individuals to accomplish anything. The results are that most of our children do not attend devotee schools. That's just a fact. And what are our opportunities? What does this translate in the next 10, 50 years? One, well, we could accept that fact. We could say we just can't get it together, and we should just find the best non-devotee school and put your children there and hope for the best. That's one solution. I personally do not like that solution. I believe very strongly in spiritual education, in devotee schools. I've been headmaster of 2 different devotee schools, and I'm on the board of directors at a couple schools in Alachua. And it's something I feel very strongly that we need to provide this. Our society needs to provide spiritual education. If you look at many religions, say the Catholic Church, they have a very, very well-established system of parochial schools all the way through colleges. You might think of Notre Dame, but there's actually hundreds and hundreds of Catholic universities and colleges throughout even just the United States. So, of course, we don't have the money, we don't have the numbers, we don't have the history of the Catholic Church. But I'm saying that's more what we should be looking towards than what we have now. We need to be thinking ahead, we need to be thinking progressively about all of these issues. So I think there are many, many opportunities. As our movement grows and our communities grow, we have the opportunity, just because of numbers, to be able to organize spiritual education for our children. Just one example that I'll give, and of course I'm there just because I happen to know this example well, is the Bhaktivedanta Academy of North America in Alachua, which is the largest devotee school in North America for sure. And by next year, I'll have 100 students in it, and all the teachers are certified. The facilities are on the temple ground, nice facility there. Very excellent academics. The middle school years should be certified by next October for a program called International Baccalaureate, which is an extremely prestigious academic achievement that will help attract many, many professional families and people who really want high quality education, as well as spiritual education for their children. I could talk many more things about it, but the important thing is that within this good educational environment, there is the spiritual environment. You know, the children are studying Bhagavad Gita, the scriptures every day, all their performances they put on, their music, their plays, everything is based around Krishna consciousness. They have this whole program they do around, in the middle years, I think 4th through 6th grade, they study the Srimad Bhagavatam in its entirety over those 3 years. They do, four cantos a year, break it into quarters, so it's one canto every quarter. Anyway, and they do all the stuff around it, and they do presentations, etc. And it's wonderful. The parents are so happy to see their children engage this way in Krishna consciousness, and the children like it. The children are having a great time. It's not some drudgery. Krishna consciousness is naturally attractive to the soul. And if it's presented nicely with children, these young Vaishnavas, they immediately take to it and understand it. So there's no difficulty. The difficulty is in us presenting and having it there for them. So I think our future is probably in day schools, not in ashram-based schools, at least for now. I think there's too much bad history and not enough, not enough faith in them at this point. But I think at least if we can try to develop strong schools, day schools, at least within our larger communities and eventually all communities. And over the next 50 years, as we grow and our congregation grows, I think that this will happen. I think we have a very good opportunity to do this. One of the things that makes it successful is if you have strong community support, you have support from the temple, and obviously strong parental support. You put those things together and you can develop something very, very wonderful. Obviously, we need to develop higher education. We need to develop our universities, our seminaries, etc. Absolutely, I think these things will happen over the next 50 years. How does a person become a minister in a religion or a priest or whatever? They go to a seminary, right? They get a standardized education. They learn all of the doctrine, and they also learn probably things about how to take care of their congregation. I don't know what all they learn. But they get a standardized program that prepares them to minister to their congregation. So similarly, we have to do that as well. We need more standardized education for our leaders. We're, of course, beginning to develop the GBC College. If I have time, in the last part, I'll get to that. But I just want to mention there, in case we run out of time, that we are trying to develop more training opportunities for all levels of leadership within our society that not only gives them the skills they need, but it's also a standard frame of reference. It's not that, well, they do something strange over here, and every part of the world's different. But under Srila Prabhupada's instructions, we have a common framework of what is Krishna consciousness and how do we lead in Krishna consciousness. So those opportunities, I think, are there. We also need to think about the training of our congregation and our new people that are coming. Sometimes it's very hit and miss. We find that sometimes that even in more remote areas that aren't like right next to a temple, like people coming to Chicago, you'll find that congregational members will even take initiation, but sometimes don't understand many rudimentary facts of Krishna consciousness. And even more than that, even if they have some philosophical understandings, their connection with ISKCON, the organization, and even Srila Prabhupada is sometimes quite tenuous, is not so strong. So we need to develop those type of programs from the beginning, from Bhakti courses, Bhakti Shastri, obviously all the way through. One thing we'll see, of course, in the next 50 years is the development of technology. I'm not going to speak about that much because I'm not an expert, and who knows what technology will be like in 10 years, what to speak of 50 years. It's a guess, but we know that it will increase. We know already we have more and more opportunities through using internet, etc., for presenting Krishna consciousness, for teaching, for giving coursework. Even now at our GBC Leadership College, we have half of the coursework on campus, and we have half of it online on the internet, so that we can take advantage of those technologies, other opportunities that are going to be there for us. But it's going to require thoughtful planning. We have to make some commitment of funding, manpower, money, etc., to be able to really develop strong educational institutions within our society. And I probably should end there.
So last section from me, and just if we have time, want to warn everybody that after giving this analysis and these list of things that need to be done, we're going to go around and ask each of you to pick your favorite 15 things between our two lists that you're going to commit to here today. Okay, so if you only have 7 or 8, you have time to pick a few more. So will we make a real difference? Looking at the question of our expanded outreach. The first 50 years of our society, our outreach or our preaching was very much stressed. We used to talk about the 3 angas, books, prasadam, and harinam. And then we talked about building temples and establish more deities. And these are core activities and outreach for us in terms of reaching out to the society at large. And those should and must increase with time. And that can be a whole presentation in itself. I want to look at a slightly different angle in terms of looking at the outreach. In the earliest years, our goal of all those activities was to, quote, make devotees. And devotees meant people that put on saris or put on dhotis and shaved their heads and wore tilak and moved in the temple. And we really didn't know what to do with all those people that used to come on Sundays. Because pretty much you kind of sifted through the folks that came on Sundays and decide who can you get to stay overnight, in the hope that they stayed overnight one day, they become devotees. And I remember as a bhakti leader, we didn't have such good success with that formula. I can remember as an example, one night we had 10 people stay overnight. And out of the 10, 3 were willing to get up for Mangalartik. And out of the 3 that got up, 2 lasted till breakfast, and no one was there by lunch. So we realized that we need to tweak this formula a little bit. It's not working so well. So we focused, of course, we made a lot of full-time devotees. It was a wonderful era, but that was the stress. Devotee meant full-time devotee. Then, as I mentioned earlier, slowly we came to understand that there's a congregation. So our outreach and our preaching was also to build our congregation. So now I think we've got a good balance on that, more mature, that we're trying to achieve both of those. Looking ahead, I would suggest the next 50 years, and sooner rather than later, that there's a need to expand our vision of outreach and preaching to align more with Prabhupada's vision. I don't think our vision is actually completely aligned with Prabhupada's. And as an example, I'll just mention one quote. Prabhupada said, if 1% of the population becomes Krishna conscious, then the world will change. Right? Isn't that the number, 1%? Sometimes 1%. Okay, now if we think about that, if 1% is Krishna conscious, then that leaves the other 99% are what? They're not Krishna conscious. But somehow or other, ISKCON, just 1%, will have the influence to change society, to influence the culture, as Tomahara was mentioning, influence the education, influence the policymakers, influence the laws, influence the direction of society. And isn't that, if we think about it, what brahmanas are supposed to do? Brahmanas are not supposed to be in power. They're not supposed to pull all the strings. They're supposed to advise. Advise means to give vision and to influence through higher knowledge and broader vision of all of that. So I would suggest that over the next 50 years, we need to expand our preaching vision and our goals, just as we expanded. First we thought preaching meant making full-time devotees. Then we've gone to the point of it means building congregations. Those two elements need to continue, but there's a third thing, which is to create, to expand, to develop friendships and sympathizers. A quote from Srila Prabhupada from a letter 1973 to Tejas Prabhu: "If you make some big government official interested in our movement, then our strength will increase. Because we are in the material world, sometimes we require that help. So, try to make them sympathizers." Try to make them sympathizers. And of course, we see from Prabhupada's example, he spent a lot of time trying to make sympathizers. And he didn't just make sympathizers with government people, he spent a lot of time with scholars. He spent a lot of time with media. Everywhere he went, he was meeting with people from representatives from the media. He met with neighbors. There's so many wonderful stories. He met with religious leaders. He met with musicians and artists. There's one of my favorite stories is when Prabhupada was in the UK. One time they brought to him the famous race car driver Graham Hill. And he met with him for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And the devotees who were there at the time tell the story that for 2 hours, I'm not sure if it's 2 hours, hour and a half, it was a long meeting. Prabhupada talked about one thing: race car driving. Devotees were shocked. He just talked about race car driving. But he was building, I can't understand the mind of the pure devotee. I don't think there's any history of Prabhupada racing cars. He played soccer, but he didn't race cars. But in this instance, he was building a relationship, friendship with this person. And we see that in the impact of those sympathizers that Prabhupada made and his movement made. In the United States, the first big brainwashing case, which was in New York, was that Lee? Was it the Lee? I can't remember the name of that. But it was, yeah, that was the airport case. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the case, but yes. It was in a New York case. Judge Leakey, I think. Famous case.
Anyway.
Yeah. And Prabhupada, and one of the things behind the scenes that is said to have influenced the case is Harvey Cox, who was a professor at Harvard University. I've heard it, wrote a letter to the judge and said, okay, thank you. Okay. Let me repeat that. Harvey Cox, professor of religion at Harvard University, who'd met the devotees and knew of the Vaishnava tradition, had a relationship with devotees, went to the temple. Maharaj has been to his home, went to the temple, took people took his students to the temple, wrote a letter. It was published in the New York Times, saying this is a legitimate religion, etc. The next day, the judge threw out the case. The United Kingdom, our back was against the wall. They were going to close down the temple, but devotees had many sympathizers, certain members of the government, definitely members of the broader Hindu community, academics came to the temple's rescue, saved the temple. We're still there today. Hungary, the fact that we had international influence, otherwise we would have lost our status, could have been closed down. Russia, the Bhagavad Gita was on trial. Academics in Russia came to help. The Lok Sabha, the lower, like the U.S. House of Representatives, it's the lower house of Congress, had a walkout in protest, put tremendous pressure on the Russian government. So many different examples of that. So it's easy to have such influence. In the United Kingdom now, ISKCON Foundation, I believe, ISKCON something, is the official faith partner with the Avanti schools. You're talking about education. So there the government is building Hindu schools, and ISKCON is writing the curriculum. ISKCON is the primary faith partner. University of Florida, they're rebuilding one of the plazas in the campus, and devotees are partnering with the college to rename it, if I have it correctly, Hare Krishna Lunch Plaza, something like that. So when the students come there, it's like hang out at the Hare Krishna Lunch Plaza, because we've been there for so many years.
There's a naming fee involved.
Yeah, there's a fee involved, but that's what I just talked about that. That's what the congregation's supposed to do. So it's easy to do. The opportunities are immense. People want these days more and more spiritual opinions on issues of the day. People want diversity. Most people, a little bit of a political debate right now, but most people, very interested in diversity. They want Vaishnava or Hindu or Vedic participation. They're looking for that. Communities want more involvement. You know, in terms of like the media, we're very colorful, we're very cool, we're unusual, we're great footage, we're great, a lot to say. They want us to participate. People love cultural diversity, and we have a lot to say. We have a lot to contribute about the environment. You know, for us, environment's not just because the world's destroying itself, it's because Bhumi is a demigoddess, ultimately the property of Krishna. Lord Varaha came to save the earth. Krishna drove into the Jamuna River to save it from the pollution. We're environmentally conscious because it's our theology. We're not just diverse because the world is fighting, we're diverse because it's our theology. We're not just concerned about pollution, etc. We're not concerned about, violence, all these different things. Violence in society, we have a lot to contribute. Vice mentioned the other day, stress. So many people concerned about stress. We have a whole theology, where it comes from and how to solve it, etc. Overconsumption. People are starting to realize we are consuming too much too fast. The planet can't support it. So what are they going to do with that? We have philosophical, cultural, transformative answers to those problems. Extremism and nationalism, it all comes from the bodily concept of life. We have solutions to the root problems. So there are opportunities for us to influence society, and I think more and more, as we move forward, we have to broaden our vision. Outreach, preaching, teaching. Yes, we're going to make some full-time devotees. Yes, we're going to build our congregation. And yes, we want to build friendships and make sympathizers, people that see the value of our movement, want to partner with us to help change the direction of society. And I think that's the next big wave of preaching for our society in the future.
My last topic was leadership and management structure over the next 50 years. I'm going to try to do this in 4 minutes. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm looking at the clock, and I'm saying I've got about 4 minutes to cover leadership and management over the next 50 years. So I'm going to just do it in a few bullet points.
Any questions after?
And then we'll have time for a few questions. Our management structure is still emerging and developing. We don't have enough leaders that are competent or are willing and available, going back to the economic issue. Many leaders are not adequately trained, and even if they want to get training, it's hard for them to take the time off of their very, very busy schedules to get that training. We have problems that we often have a lack of faith or adherence to the GBC and the ISKCON hierarchy. Sometimes there's allegiance to the guru, which is good, but they also need to also translate that to ISKCON, temple leadership, and to Srila Prabhupada, frankly. We have a lack of money to support administrative structures, and we have very inconsistent structural arrangements, our zones, etc. In other words, our management structure, frankly speaking, is a little bit thrown together, done the best we could, with many, many sincere devotees trying to hold things together. I think in recent years, particularly with our strategic planning, things that we've been doing on the GBC level, we're trying to change that to a more organized, a more professional way of approaching management and leadership. And I think this is really starting to happen right now. We're not seeing a lot of the fruits of it, but I think the basis, the foundations are being formed, so the next 50 years, these things will emerge. I think some of the opportunities we have, why is the sun is bright? Some of the opportunities that we have is, I think there's a growing consensus amongst at least the GBC and many devotees that we need better training. We need a standardized program of training for all levels of leadership. We have our GBC college that will expand into more and more levels, compulsory standardized training. We need to develop a rational system of zonal management, appropriate spans of control, which means that we need more levels. We need zonal supervisors, more levels of managers coming in to take care of more parts of the whole management structure, more contiguous zones. In other words, not that I have a temple here and one in Siberia, one in South Africa, and one in Estonia, kind of thing. now we're not there yet. We're still working on it. I'm mostly in the southeast area, ranging from my temples in my zone, range from Miami to New Vrindavan. It's not too bad. And recently, of course, they totally violated this principle by agreeing to become a GBC for Hawaii, only 6,000 miles away from my home. But anyway, so we're still doing a little of this patchwork, doing things by necessity, convenience, relationships, etc. But at least we are putting frameworks in place where the goal is clear that we want to have these things more regularized, we want to do things in a more professional manner. And that's really is going to be our challenge, to really get to that point. One of the problems, of course, will be having the budget, the staff, and administrative structures to support the leadership. We have very little right now. Most of us have very little staff. We just, do what we can do, and often that's inadequate because we don't really have the time and the manpower and the backup and the money to do more, even if we could. So these things are all issues. They're issues at the local level. Having the support that Newton was talking about, that our congregation properly supports local leaders, temple presidents, etc. So these are the types of challenges that I think if we can meet them, and I think we're beginning to understand them better, and we're developing frameworks and practices and policies so that leading into the future, we're going to have a better leadership structure, and that will in turn lead to helping with all these other issues, whether it's education, devotee care, economics, outreach, communications. All of this will be better done if our internal ISKCON structure is more organized and more effective. So, Hare Krishna, thank you so much. I'll go to Srila Prabhupada. I think we have a few minutes for questions. I think Romapad Swami wants to begin.
As Vaisheshika Prabhu says, fantastic. Go ahead.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Would you like to elaborate a little?
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy that I asked you two to speak on this topic. And in fact, it's a very broad topic, but you did a fantastic job covering points, a very broad set of points. It's very clear to me that you're both very deep thinking and visionary personalities. So the contribution that you have made and towards these ends will, I'm sure, continue to make most grateful. And two things. One is one of the topics that we'll be discussing later today in our final day of our meeting is what are some U.S. and Canada, North American points of focus that we all can identify as meaningful, doable, even if it's incremental. So I would, because you put all this nice thought together, I'd like to see this also take place in our meeting in January. More of the same, maybe with more time or whatever it is. But please give thought for our meeting today, later, something that you feel is doable that we can focus on to help us move the ball down the field a little bit. And, we can all get behind and do. Now, one of them is this financial topic, economy. But that's my request to both of you. You did such a fantastic job presenting. Consider something that North America can look at out of all this, 15 things and get behind, focus on, at least one rather than too much so we can't chew anything. That's it.
Anuttama Prabhu, you mentioned different categories of people that we should be cultivating, including friends and sympathizers. I really like that point. Widening the field, not just thinking about people who are going to stay overnight and become part of the ashram. That was very helpful. Is there a difference between a friend and a sympathizer, actually? Or do you have a technical definition that's different between the two, or is that kind of like friends and sympathizers all in one?
Yeah, I might have to think about it more, but I kind of put them together. I mean, a friend generally is a sympathizer, and I think, I mean, I remember, just as an example, in Denver, we opened a Govinda's buffet in the temple, and there was some zonal issues. So we got one of those little red tags hanging on the door. So we had to go and appeal. And we called a woman who had taken a vegetarian cooking class that my wife and I taught at a local junior high school, happened to be the director of the Hale Bellevue Neighborhood Society. And she called me up, she said, you know, I got a letter from the city that they're actually trying to shut down, you know, your food program in the temple. She said, I don't agree with that, and I'd like to talk to you about what I can do to help. So she took the initiative, and long story short, she had me come to one of her meetings. She did not put the topic on the agenda. At the end of the meeting, she stood up and said, oh, there's one other topic. So-and-so's here from the head of the Hare Krishna temple. The city wants to shut them down. I don't agree with it. I think we should oppose this action by the city. I'd like to know, do you all agree? And before people could say anything, she said, thank you very much. As the president, I'll take this on as my personal task. So then she went to the zoning meeting, and she explained that the neighborhoods behind them, and one of the reasons she didn't publicize that the meeting was going to be held, because she knew there were 1 or 2 crazy neighbors that would come and make trouble, who never come to the meetings but would come if they saw us there. So she used her position of influence to try to, you know, make sure that the neighborhood had a positive decision. And she went to this meeting, and she told these 5 supervisors, she said, if you shut down their buffet, you have to shut down every single pancake supper in every single church in the city. And as the head of the neighborhood association, we oppose the city's action. We could have supported the city, been neutral, or opposed. We oppose it. We like these people. They're our neighbors. Don't go after them. You're going to have to go after every church, and I'm going to make sure you do it. So, till today, you can go to the Denver temple and for a moderate donation, have some prasadam at the Govinda's buffet, courtesy of that lady who I'm sure made tremendous spiritual advancement. So there's an example. I mean, we also hired a lawyer. We did different things like that, but she was a critical part of the process because she was a sympathizer.
Anuttama Prabhu, recently I saw a T-shirt, and it said, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge.
Yes.
Questions from, oh, did you have more? Questions from other people? Any other comments or questions on anything?
I think a little bit was spoken about that point, but one thing I strongly feel, having done that personally, is that when we become a devotee in ISKCON, when we are a devotee, we don't really care about the outside of our temple or our society or world. And when you don't have a good relationship with the cities and councilmen, and no one knows anything about you, what you do, then a first problem occurs. They just become very heavy on you, like police and everybody. So it's a very good practice as a devotee to be really nice to all the people around neighborhood, and we should know some people in a city hall and those kind of things. So I think the point is we should integrate more and more ourselves into the mainstream society without losing our core values and what we do as a devotee. But sometimes we tend not to be doing that and keep ourselves isolated. So there is a wall, some sort of invisible wall. And that's my point. Thank you.
And historically, we only go through that wall when we're in crisis. When they're going to shut down the manor, we go meet the neighbors. When they're going to close down the Bhagavad Gita, we go talk to the scholars. When, there's a crime problem, we go meet the policemen. But we should meet the policemen ahead of time. We should meet the scholars ahead of time. We should meet the neighbors ahead of time. And I'll just add one other thing if I can. I had a fourth point, but I didn't develop because there wasn't enough time. I think in long term too, this brings up another critical question, which is how do we maintain the balance of involving ourselves more with society, but not losing our focus, our purity, our real emphasis on being Krishna conscious, because many of us that came from different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, we left our tradition of birth because it was too watered down, it was too mushy, it was all about thank you God for giving us the pleasures of the earth, and we realize it's not enough. So how do we, like Jesus said, live in the world but not be of the world? And I think one of the things that our strength is, we have grahastas who are to be more in the world, and we have sannyasis who, with their preaching and teaching, they're in the world, but they're the emblem of renunciation, and what the goal is to get out of here. Don't get too comfortable. But at the same time, if we're too focused on renunciation and separation, how are we going to influence the world? We can't do it. Can't do it. So that balance is going to be a challenge. And I think structurally, with our Vaishnava culture, we're very well equipped to do it. But it's going to take some conscious thought to keep that balance.
Any final question? I think we're out of time. Okay. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Prabhupada.